Wait, are you holding a smartphone right now? Or are you watching this video on a laptop? A tablet? It doesn't matter what device it is. Inside the device, right at this very moment, there is a tiny component working away. It's smaller than your fingernail. A piece of silicon so small, it's barely even visible. Yet, that single piece is currently sitting dead center in the most intense geopolitical tension in the world. Hard to believe, right? That piece is called a semiconductor. And today, we're going to dig into the story of how this tiny fragment ended up holding the fate of the world in its hands. Ready? December 2020, Austin, Texas. Samsung Electronics was scouting candidates for a new semiconductor plant site. The pressure to have a manufacturing base in the US was mounting. A few months later, another company started building a factory in Arizona. TSMC, the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company. Do you know how the US government reacted when they heard this news? They were relieved. The country with the world's most powerful military breathed a sigh of relief over the construction of a factory making chips the size of a fingernail. Why? Why is the US so obsessed with semiconductors? Let's start there. You all know what a semiconductor is, right? Simply put, it's a chip that calculates electrical signals, the brain of a smartphone, the brain of a computer, the brain of a car. In modern civilization, almost every device that uses electricity contains semiconductors. Refrigerators, washing machines, traffic lights, fighter jets, nuclear submarines, all of them. So if we can't make semiconductors, modern civilization simply grinds to a halt. But if you ask where the world's most advanced semiconductors are made, the answer is shocking. It's Taiwan. More specifically, a single company called TSMC produces about 90% of the world's most cutting-edge semiconductors. Apple's iPhone chips, Nvidia's AI chips, AMD's processors. TSMC makes them all. American companies design them, but they can't make them. Taiwan does the manufacturing. Let's open up a map here. Where is Taiwan? It's an island just 180 kilometers off the coast of China. 180 kilometers. That's closer than the distance from Seoul to Daejeon. From China's perspective, Taiwan is practically their front yard. And China doesn't recognize Taiwan as an independent country. They've officially declared that they must eventually reunite it as part of China. Now what happens when you put these two facts together? It means the factory that builds the brains of global civilization is sitting right on top of the most dangerous geopolitical fault line on Earth. It's like having the world's only heart transplant hospital built right next to an active volcano. To really understand this, we need to go a bit deeper. Why TSMC emerge in Taiwan? Was it a coincidence? Or was it inevitable? In 1987, an engineer named Morris Chang founded TSMC in Taiwan. Back then, this company was just a semiconductor subcontractor. It was a foundry model where other companies did the design, and they only handled the manufacturing. But then something massive happened. Morris Chang poured absolutely everything into semiconductor manufacturing. He invested madly in R&D, gathered top talent, and relentlessly refined their processing technology. Fast forward a few decades, and TSMC's manufacturing tech reached a level no other company in the world could match. Intel can't keep up. Even Samsung lagged behind. Seeing this, semiconductor design companies all over the world started outsourcing their manufacturing to TSMC one by one. Apple did it. Qualcomm did it. Nvidia did it. IM did it. Just like that, TSMC became the world's factory. Now the world's brain factory. But there's an uncomfortable truth to this success story that no one talks about. Taiwan didn't become a semiconductor powerhouse just because TSMC did a great job. Geographical conditions played a role. 2. Taiwan is an island that meets many of the requirements for semiconductor production, a highly educated engineering workforce, industrial clusters, and a well-formed supply chain. But there was another decisive factor: the US security umbrella. During the Cold War, the US needed to contain communism in Asia. Taiwan was a strategic choke point on that defense line. The US protected Taiwan, and Taiwan was able to grow its economy within that security. Because they didn't have to fight, they could focus on technology. Security fostered tech, and tech fostered the economy. The result is TSMC. So TSMC wasn't built solely on Taiwan's technological prowess. It's also a byproduct of Cold War geopolitics. It's a paradox, isn't it? Geopolitical tension created TSMC, and now TSMC has become the epicenter of new geopolitical tension. Now we have to talk about China. China is currently risking everything to achieve semiconductor independence. Why? Because the US took a shocking measure in 2022. They completely banned the export of advanced semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China. TSMC was blocked from selling advanced chips to China. The extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography machines from the Dutch company ASML, without which you can't make advanced chips, were also banned from being sold to China. The US started choking China with technology. How did China react? They're desperately trying to make their own chips. Spearheaded by Huawei, they're trying to build up their domestic foundry. SMIC, they are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into their semiconductor industry. But reality is harsh. Right at this moment, China's semiconductor technology is at least 5 to 10 years behind TSMC's. No matter how much money you pour in, a technological gap isn't closed overnight. That technology is know-how accumulated over decades. So, from China's perspective, what's the fastest answer? Getting their hands on TSMC directly. Taking over Taiwan. Here's where the map comes in again. I want to point out a very crucial geographical fact here. The Taiwan Strait, the water between Taiwan and mainland China. It's so narrow that on a clear day, you can see buildings on the mainland from Taiwan. Militarily speaking, it's an incredibly difficult distance to defend, but it's not just a matter of distance. Zoom out on the map. Look east of Taiwan, and that's where the Pacific Ocean begins. The waters that lead straight to the US mainland. North of Taiwan is Japan. South are the Philippines. Military strategists call this the first island chain. It's a chain of islands stretching from the Kuril Islands to Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, the Philippines, and Borneo. From the perspective of the Chinese Navy, these islands are blocking their path to the Pacific. For China to expand into the Pacific, they have to break through this island chain. And right in the middle of that chain, in the most critical position, sits Taiwan. Taiwan isn't just an island with semiconductor factories. It's the key to China's gateway to the Pacific. The reason China wants Taiwan isn't solely about semiconductors. It's about geography. It's about location. Then why does the US have to protect Taiwan? Look at the same map from the opposite direction, and you get the answer to the US. The Pacific is its own lake. Since World War II, the US has dominated the Pacific. They've maintained Pacific hegemony by placing military bases in Guam, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. If China takes Taiwan, that island chain is breached. The Chinese Navy would be able to sail freely into the Pacific. American hegemony in the Pacific would be shaken. So the Taiwan issue for the US isn't just about defending democracy. It's about dominance over the Pacific. It's a matter of military survival. The two most powerful nations in the world are engaging in this level of conflict over a single semiconductor factory. Let me introduce a very interesting concept right here. It's the concept of the silicon shield. It's a theory argued by some strategists in Taiwan. The logic is that because Taiwan is so deeply intertwined with the global economy through TSMC, if China attacks Taiwan, China itself would suffer massive damage. Chinese companies use TSMC chips. 2. Huawei does, and so do Chinese automakers. If Taiwan is attacked, TSMC stops, and then the Chinese economy takes a hit. The idea is that semiconductors act as a sort of nuclear deterrent. They are so entangled that neither side dares to touch the other. But how reliable is this logic? Actually, right up until Russia invaded Ukraine, many experts peddled a similar logic. They said because Russia and Europe are intertwined through energy, a war wouldn't happen. We all know how that turned out. Economic interdependence preventing war is not a historically proven truth. At a certain point, geopolitical desire completely overwhelms economic rationality. Alright, let's talk about Samsung now. Why is Samsung in South Korea? This isn't a coincidence either. South Korea has exceptional human resources for the semiconductor industry, a zeal for education, engineering talent, and a strong manufacturing base. These factors are real, but behind the scenes, it's geopolitics again. South Korea was a core nation in the US East Asian defense line during the Cold War. Much like Taiwan, it was able to grow its economy under the US security umbrella. Becoming a semiconductor powerhouse from the ashes of war in the 1950s was partly thanks to the geopolitical shield created by its geographical location. And right now, South Korea is facing a similar dilemma. China is South Korea's largest trading partner. Both Samsung and SK Hynix have factories in China, but the US is pressuring them not to hand over semiconductor technology to China. South Korea is a country whose economy is tied to China, but whose security is tied to the US, it being forced to choose between the two. Just as Ukraine was torn between Russia and the West, South Korea is currently wavering between the US and China. The terrain is different, but the logic of a buffer state remains the same. Let's look at this story from a more macro perspective. In the 20th century, oil was the key resource of geopolitics. A country without a drop of oil couldn't become a superpower. The value of the Middle East wasn't just religious or cultural. The superpowers obsessed over it because it was a land with oil. In the 21st century, semiconductors are taking that place. You can't develop AI without semiconductors. You can't build modern military weapons without them. Without semiconductors, there are no self-driving cars, no 5G networks, no smart cities. Therefore, the country that controls semiconductors holds the hegemony of the 21st century. And the key to that hegemony is, right at this very moment, sitting on an island just across a 180-kilometer wide strait. Let me pose a very uncomfortable question at this point. What happens if China attacks Taiwan tomorrow? The economic consequences could be far more shocking than the military ones. If TSMC's main factories are destroyed or halt operations, the global supply of semiconductors gets cut off. Smartphone production stops. Car production stops. Server production stops. Medical equipment in hospitals and navigation systems in airplanes will all be affected. One economist called this a modern-day atomic bomb. Not a physical explosion, but an explosion of the supply chain. Now you sort of understand why the US cares so much about Taiwan, right? But here lies the most fascinating paradox. The US knows this risk. That's why they're trying to bring TSMC to the US. The Arizona factory is that project. Samsung is also building a factory in Texas. But is this actually possible? A semiconductor fab isn't just a building. Decades of accumulated processing technology, skilled personnel, and the supply chain ecosystem all have to be relocated together. TSMC's Arizona plant is already running into issues. They're short on skilled engineers. The process yield isn't matching what they get in Taiwan. Technology resides in people, and people exist within a long stretch of time. Moving a factory is easy, but moving the technological ecosystem side, it is a completely different story. The technological clustering created by geography isn't easily replicated just by changing the geography. It's quite a peculiar truth. Let's wrap up today's story. The smartphone in your hand. That single fingernail-sized chip inside it. If you trace back how that chip was made, you uncover the history of the Cold War, the topography of the island chains, and the US-China rivalry for hegemony. One tiny chip is connected to the world order, and at the center of that connection is the map. Location. Geography. It's no accident that TSMC is in Taiwan. It's no accident that Samsung is in South Korea. The security structure forged by the Cold War fostered technology, and that technology is now forging a new geopolitics. History doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes. Semiconductors have stepped into the spot once held by oil, and the logic that fueled the fight over the Middle East is now being repeated over Taiwan. If you can't read that rhythm, the things happening in the world just look like news. But once you start reading that rhythm, the news starts looking like a map. Take another look at your smartphone today. Inside it holds the world. Next time, we're heading to Africa. Despite pouring trillions of dollars in aid over decades, we'll talk about why the conflicts never end. I'll tell you how the reason lies in a single pencil line drawn in a conference room in Berlin 1884.